I'm not an attorney. I didn't stay in a Holiday Inn Express the other night, so I can't play an attorney.
Welcome to God at Work, stories of calling, courage, and conviction. Through real stories and meaningful conversations, we'll discover how God shows up in the boardroom, the job site, and beyond. Here's your hosts, Gina Ventola and Adam Kemper.
Welcome to God at Work. This morning we're joined by Phil Gibson. Phil is a Colorado native and co-founder of the Unity Group with Keller Williams Realty DTC, serving buyers, sellers, and investors across the Denver metro area. Known for his data-driven consultative approach, Phil helps clients make confident real estate decisions while building long-term wealth through smart strategy and local expertise. He and his wife, Beth Gibson, have been involved in the Denver area real estate market for a combined 25 plus years. Phil, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Phil, we're so glad you're here. And I have to stop right off the bat that you and I have something in common. We both love the same college football team.
Yeah.
And I'm familiar with your story, but could you share why Alabama, the Crimson Tide, is your favorite college football team?
Sure. So growing up, from about the age of 6 or 7, I started spending time at my grandfather's farm in Paducah, Kentucky, and he was born and raised in Alabama. And so, as a young kid, I was fortunate in the sense that both my grandparents, I looked up to him. He was a hardworking guy, but he kind of burned into me that there's only one football team in the country, and that's Alabama. So yeah, so that's when I kind of from the young age I became a fan and have been since I was a little kid. So and now my son's carrying that forward. He's become an Alabama fan as well. So yeah, he actually went to the Alabama Tennessee game about 3 years ago in Knoxville and had a good time. He was all of his buddies wore Tennessee burnt orange, and he was in the Crimson Tide. So he was probably caught some grief a little bit, but that's okay. He could handle it. So yeah, so that's
I
where that
love
story comes from.
I love that so much. They're and I'm originally from there, when I lived there, when I was younger, Bear Bryant was the coach, and that he was the man. And
Yeah,
so that's who I got kind of exposed to when we moved there when I was little. And they were just a great team. And Bear Bryant was famous for sending, when they were beating another team by a great deal, he was sending third and fourth string in to play just so they could get playing time. So by the time they were juniors and seniors, they were unstoppable. I mean,
yeah,
it's just really a good time for college football back then. Well,
yeah,
switching gears,
yeah.
um, as your work at your group with Keller Williams, what does the phrase "God at work" mean to you?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing it means is just to have God involved in the aspects of what you do as a professional. And for Beth and I, that's meant um, having just realizing that whether it's real estate or any other profession, there's more things out of your control than in your control. And so, from our perspective, we've always felt like if you have God in your life, then and in our work world, then those things that you realize once you realize that you don't have control over a lot of stuff other than the behaviors you bring forward, the interactions with your client, your ethics and morals, which are for us are foundationally based in God. Once you bring all those things forward, um, there's a comfort level that you have, that that He's going to things are going to work out. However, they might, not always good, but they're going to work out the way they should. And there's a certain level of, I think, contentment that you receive from that. So I think, that's that's probably the biggest piece when I think about God at work. That's probably the biggest piece we have.
How do you intentionally keep God at work with you? I mean, I think you went into some of it with contentment.
Yeah. I think part of it is I try to Beth and I, we pray about our business. We pray that, clients that want to work with us will be brought to, forward to us. But I think probably the biggest thing is, the interaction that I have with other Christians, and just expressing, some of the challenges you have. Um, and if you are surrounding yourself with other believers in your work world, I think that just reinforces, um, the involvement of having God in your life and just reinforcing your belief system. And so it's not to say that, the only people we work with are believers. I don't ask somebody when I'm trying to help them either buy or sell a house, what their belief system is. If they ask me, I'm going to tell them, but, a lot of times that doesn't really come up. I think through your behaviors and your actions and the way you handle yourself, people start to realize, where you're coming from. And so I think that's probably the biggest piece for us that, keeps God in the workplace. But, the biggest thing is just prayer, having prayer about your business and telling others what your challenges are and asking them to pray for you as well.
Well,
Well,
and you
speaking
work.
of challenges, where do you think you can improve?
Oh boy. I would say probably being more consistent from the prayer standpoint, and then also um, determining ways that, because I think everybody, if you're an entrepreneur, you have a certain level of control freakism that you you kind of want to manage things all the time, and it's important, I think, from an improvement standpoint, just to understand, continue to kind of think about and understand those things that you have, some semblance of control over and being able to navigate that effectively. And that's the challenging part is really uh, releasing it, being able to release it to God and just say, hey, take this on. Um, I don't know what to do here. And can you just take this on and help me figure out how to navigate this? Because, there's always client challenges. I know both of you guys have run into things where there's unrealistic expectations sometimes. You're not going to make everyone happy all the time, but communicating in such a way that you get your message across. I think, I find myself doing that, like when I go in on listing appointments or I'm about to meet a buyer for the first time that I may or may not know. Usually saying a prayer before you go have that. God, allow these words to be your words that will have an impact on this person in a positive way. And that whatever their decision is, that I'll be comfortable with that decision, afterwards, whether they decide to work with me or not. Um, and just be okay with that and move on. I've been in sales a long time, so I've become pretty callous to negative feedback and people that don't want to work with you. They make decisions where they decide they don't want to work with you, and just be okay with that. I think that's the biggest thing a lot of times with in the sales world or the entrepreneurial world is just not everybody wants, sometimes it's a personality thing, sometimes it's just people have certain aspects that they want to try to achieve and they just don't match up. And so I think probably the biggest area for improvement is just don't take things personally. It's just a business situation and it doesn't fit.
Thank you,
Well, and I
Phil.
think in
Adam, I
the
actually interrupted you. Go ahead.
no, you're good. Thank you. You know, Phil, you work in an interesting space because it can be very competitive, and as in any place, there can be some ethical challenges, but when you're dealing with something of such a large dollar value, as a home purchase, that can bring extra pieces into it. And you kind of talked about it, the know me by my work mentality, but now how else do you kind of embody in what you go out and into the world with? You also mentioned you don't just work, of course, with believers, and that's not a question you ask in your vetting. But what do you do in such a highly competitive, highly challenging space to keep God really embodied in your business?
I think just constantly having, again, I go back to, and this is going to sound redundant, but I think the biggest thing for us is just prayer, study, keep yourself involved with people that, because I certainly don't consider myself any type of a Bible scholar where I can just throw off, verses for any situation. That's not who I am. So I really try to keep myself grounded with people that do that. It's that proverbial put yourself around people that do things better than you do to allow yourself to grow. And so that's what I try to do as it pertains to keeping yourself grounded, continually building that foundation of the Lord in your life. And then I think from that, once you have that foundation built, I think then from that, that's what kind of bleeds into your work and just constantly, having that on your mind. How can you know, I'm driving around a lot, so so sometimes rather than listening to sports radio or some football program or something like that, I will just mute the thing and just start praying about things that are on my mind. So that's the way I try to keep it in front and center a lot of times. Now, do I do that all the time? No, not as much as I should. I'm all, um, but I think what I've noticed is that when I do, you have less of these ups and downs. You have more of this consistency, and and part of it too, I think, is listening to what God's telling you, not just asking all the time, but just listening. And sometimes just quiet in the car when you're just rolling down the road is for me is a good space to just kind of receive what he's trying to tell you.
Well, I think inside of that, you gloss over a little bit of a really deep piece of wisdom, though, because in this consistent, you don't chase dollars, you don't risk your ethics, you don't have to do desperate things in desperate times. You have a place to turn to. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you shared there with that because it keeps you from going down the ethical questionable roads that some of your people in your industry have do sometimes, and
Yeah.
most bad decisions are born out of desperation.
Well, and you touch on something there, Adam, that I think is really important. Beth and I don't look at working with people on, you referenced in a comment a minute ago. This is most likely the largest transaction that somebody will make in their lifetime. Other than, if they happen to buy a business or something like that, this will be their largest transaction. And so we don't look at it as a transaction. We look at it as we are helping people achieve legacy wealth building so that they can grow their family, their life, whatever it is they're trying to achieve, whatever their particular goals are. And so when we sit down with them, part of them is um, probably the first 10 minutes, we don't even talk about a house. We're talking about what they want to try to achieve. What is it that they're looking for? And so I think from that perspective, we don't see this as a transaction. We just see this as a long-term relationship that we're trying to build. Whether they buy one house with us or they, end up buying three or four, doesn't matter. We're this blip in time for them to help them achieve what they want to achieve. And so I think it's important because there's a lot of individuals out there that I won't say that a lot is probably unfair. That's a generalization. There are individuals out there that see this as a transaction and they don't try to establish any type of relationship with people. It's just, we're getting this done. I'm making um, I'm gaining a revenue for my organization, and then I'm moving on. We try to stay in contact with people. We try to, and for us, that's what means the building of the business, because the business itself is based on referrals. We don't do this as a hobby. To your point, Adam, there are a lot of hobbyists out there, which increases the competitiveness of the industry. And for us, it's a full-time deal. So we have to stay informed, because as Gina will tell you, being in the legal field, this is a contract, and it's very serious, and people need to understand that. And when you sign on the dotted line, you are committing yourself to performing a certain activity. Or if you do a contract on a home, yeah, there are outs in the contract, like there are in many contracts, but when you sign that contract, the intention is that you are going to move forward, unless there's something there. So,
Mhm.
and I think, again, that goes back to your foundational belief system. If you come into this thing with with a foundation that you are helping people achieve a certain goal, and you have conversations with them related to that, then um, it's going to give them clarity. It's going to give them understanding about what they're doing. So.
That servant mindset. I love that.
Yeah,
That's really what that comes down to.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yep.
So, Phil, where do you see God working in your life right now?
Well, um, probably the biggest place is, in our family. We have a really tight-knit family with our kids and grandkids. Um, we're all really close. Son-in-laws, my two daughters are married, so we have two son-in-laws, and we're all really close. And that even is extended out to some of the extended family, the family, the son-in-law's family, and that kind of stuff. Whether they're in town here, trying to communicate with them and stay in touch. And um, so, I think when you see that cohesiveness in your family, um, that just doesn't happen by accident. It takes hard work. It takes understanding, um, having God work in your life when your kids don't do what you think they should, and God telling you to shut your mouth and just move forward. And let them, as adults, we've all made decisions that I'm sure our parents didn't really like, and we all learn from them. And and just being aware of that. I think, becoming a grandparent, I think taught me that, my kids, and Beth told them this, um, do the things you liked that we did, and change the things you didn't. And and when she tells them that, then we have to be okay with the things that we thought. But last time I checked, I didn't get a guidebook when the first one was born saying, "Hey, this is what we needed to do," right? And so you just kind of, it's like every parent. I think they wing it and they do the best they can. And we've always told them, you know, to try to we built this foundation for them, when we were, involved in church and taking them to church, and their summer activities a lot of times were Christian based. Um, so I think that's probably the biggest thing that I see, is we just have communicated to them to just build this foundation for yourselves, and then choose how you want to work with that. Choose how you want to implement that in your family core unit. Um, So I think, that's probably the biggest place I see from a personal nature. Um, because, from my perspective, work is the vehicle that allows you to do the things that you enjoy. Um, and part of that is just the time we spend with our family. It's invaluable. The memories that you create, the experiences you create, I think those are all really cool. So that's probably where I see the biggest impact. And then, on the flip side, in the work field, Beth and I, these last 2 years, as you guys, as we see each other in the community, the common question I always get asked is, "Oh, hey, how's the market?" That's the common question, right? Because the news stations will tell you that, everything's about to fall off a cliff and, it's going to implode and, whatever. But the thing that Beth and I have seen, we've been very blessed. We've been very consistent over these last 2 years. And there's a lot of competitors, as you would say, Adam, that has not been the case. And so, what do I attribute that to? Well, I attribute to my belief in God that, like I said earlier, that He's always taken care of us, regardless of what situation I've been in throughout my career, Beth's been in. It's always amazing when things just suddenly happen that you're like, okay, where did that come from? And I just always attribute that to just God working in your life. And so, for us, I think that's another place where I've seen just tremendous blessings in the workspace is that we've been consistent. It's not like we're killing it, blowing it out of the water. We're in the top 5% of our office for agents. And the only thing I can attribute that to is, we've been working hard, we've been making the calls, and the biggest thing is God's working, because of those things, God's working in our workspace. So,
Thank you, Phil. What would you like the listeners to know about you and your business?
um, I think I alluded to this earlier, but we're wanting to establish a relationship with you. We want to try to help you achieve your goals and whatever that looks like to you, obviously within the bounds of our licensure. We're not going to do anything that is going to possibly impact the way we do our business. So if there's something you want to do that we feel like is really out of bounds from what where capacities are. And then the other thing too is if you are in an area that we don't have expertise in, I'm okay referring you to somebody that does. Okay, I'm not, like if you say you want to live in Boulder, I don't know anything about Boulder as far as, I can look stuff up but I'm better off referring you to somebody that works in Boulder, that can help you navigate that community, that can give you insight on that community. Because, this is a place you're going to be living probably for 2 to 5 years before you decide that you're going to make another change, or if it's a bigger house, maybe it's a different situation. But um, I think that's the other thing too, is if we're not a fit, we're okay referring you to somebody that is. And so I think those are probably the biggest things. And again, I refer back to what I said earlier. Um, there are we're not looking at this as a transaction. Are there, like we're working with an investor, that's different than a traditional buyer or seller, right? Investors have a different mentality. It's based on, their financial requirements and what they want to achieve through renting or refurbing a home to sell it later. And so our approach changes based on what their goals are. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is that you'll hear from us. We will have the conversation with you about what it is you want to achieve. And then if you're not ready, then we'll say, hey, you need to talk to these people to get yourself ready. Because sometimes, people start with us when they should probably start maybe with somebody else, whether it's a financial planner or a lender or whatever that looks like. So kind of more of I think we think of ourselves as educators on the real estate business. I think, online stuff, now Chat GPT or any kind of AI system that somebody's using, everybody thinks they can become an expert. And through doing stuff through those mediums. And I would tell you that's a portion of what the process looks like. And so I think our job too is probably the biggest part of our job is educating people on the process. What does it look like? I think people don't take enough, they don't give enough credence to the contract and all the language in the contract and what that looks like. And so, I'm not an attorney. I didn't stay in a Holiday Inn Express the other night, so I can't play an attorney. And so, part of it is, that's the other thing. If people have significant questions, we refer them to attorneys and say, hey, ask the attorney this question if it's really important to you. Obviously, attorneys draft our contracts and they allow us through our licensure to, work within the confines, the boundaries of that contract. And so I think it's important, that we educate people on what that means and what that looks like. And so, one of the big things we do is we go through that contract with people. And Adam, to your question earlier, I'm not sure everybody does that. I won't speak for anybody else, but I know that's one of the pieces that Beth and I do. And you can see people sometimes when we're going through this thing, it's typical legalese, right? They start zoning out. So you have to make it kind of entertaining to gather them back in because you don't want them missing something that could be important. So yeah, I think that
I,
covers it.
I think that's actually an excellent point of not allowing them to miss things, especially that are important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And speaking of things that are important, Phil, what would you like our listeners to know about God?
You know, um, I think probably the biggest thing is trust the process of being a believer. You're not always going to get the answer that you want. You're not always going to get it in the time you want it. Um, but you will get an answer. And I think sometimes that's tough for people because we're in a right now society. You look something up on Google or you throw it into Chat GPT and within 30 seconds you have an answer. And that's not the way God works. He works on his own timing. And I think, that's probably the biggest piece that over my lifetime that I've had to learn is to really trust the process. Trust the fact that if you're praying, you're listening, you surround yourself with people that help you grow, um, that process in and of itself will strengthen your belief system in God. So I think that's probably what I want to say about that. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Phil, so much. We appreciate you being here and learning more about you and the Unity
Yeah.
Group at Keller Williams and your work with Beth. And as you, I also work with my spouse, so I understand the special challenges and the fun parts of working with your spouse. And so it was
Yeah.
really nice to hear you elaborate on those. As we close out, Phil, will you pray us out?
Yeah, you bet. Dear Lord, I thank you for what Gina and Adam are doing here on God at Work, Lord, and just hopefully that it will be impactful to others, that people will, hear these series that they are going through. It will, really impact their hearts and allow them to turn to you, to grow with you, and to be more of what they can be through your guidance and through your strength. And just ask that you would be involved in each of our lives, both those that are listening, those that will listen, and those that are involved, Lord. Thank you for all these things. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
This is God at Work, reminding you to lead with faith, serve with purpose, and live out your calling. Until we meet again, keep walking boldly in your faith, at work and beyond, and remember, your business is your ministry.